Have you ever wondered what you would do if the two people you trusted most in the world betrayed you in the most unthinkable way? What happens when the foundation of your life is revealed to be a lie, just moments before you're meant to celebrate its greatest chapter? This is the story of Clara, a woman who is seen by everyone as a gentle soul, a quiet daughter, a perfect future wife. They saw her grace, but they mistook it for fragility. They saw her kindness, but they mistook it for weakness. On the night before her wedding, she learned a truth so monstrous it threatened to break her. But what she did next wasn't about breaking. It was about forging herself anew, in the fire of betrayal, into a weapon of truth that would bring an entire church and the two men who wronged her to a deafening, soul-shaking silence. Clara had spent her entire life walking on a path paved for her by her father, Richard Hawthorne. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, a titan of industry whose love felt conditional, measured in success and obedience. Clara had always been the obedient daughter, the soft counterpoint to his harsh world. Her fiancé, Mark, was Richard's chosen successor, not just in business, but in life. He was handsome, charismatic, and ambitious, a perfect reflection of her father's values. Clara believed she loved him. More accurately, she was taught to love him. Their wedding was to be the social event of the year, less a union of two souls and more a merger of two empires, the Hawthorne legacy and its future. The night before the ceremony, a nervous energy buzzed through the opulent hotel where the wedding party was staying. Clara, in her suite, held a small, leather-bound journal. It was a gift for her father, filled with childhood memories and photos, a final token of the little girl who adored him. She wanted to give it to him in person, to share one last, quiet moment before she ceased to be just his daughter. She made her way down the hushed, carpeted hallway to his presidential suite. Her heart felt full, a gentle mix of nostalgia and anticipation. As she raised her hand to knock, she heard voices from within. Mark's voice. And her father's. They were laughing. A deep, conspiratorial laugh that sent a strange, cold prickle down her spine. It wasn't the sound of a father-in-law sharing a celebratory drink with his son-to-be. It was something else. Something slick and private. She paused, her knuckles hovering over the dark wood of the door. "She'll never suspect a thing," Mark said, his voice dripping with an arrogance she had never heard before. "She's too trusting. Always has been. It's what you love about her, right?" So beautifully naive, Richard's gruff chuckle followed. "It's what makes her manageable. A good asset. Just like her mother. You handle her, Mark. You keep her happy in her little world, and I'll keep our world, the real world, turning." Clara's breath caught in her throat. An asset? Manageable? The words felt like stones pelting her. But it was what came next that shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. "Last night was a hell of a farewell to your bachelorhood," Richard's voice lowered, thick with a smugness that was purely vile. "A final toast." To family, Mark's reply was a low murmur, but the implication was a thunderclap in the silent hallway. "She's going to be my wife tomorrow, Richard." There was no shock or anger in his tone. Only a strange, proprietary claim. Don't forget that Richard's laugh was sharp. "I made you, my boy. I made this whole deal. Everything you have, everything you will have, it comes from me." Never forget that the journal slipped from Clara's numb fingers, landing on the plush carpet with a soft, defeated thud. The air in her lungs turned to ice. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a transaction. A power play. And she was the currency. "Last night. My father. My fiancé." The words echoed in the cavern of her mind, a horrifying, demonic chant. Her legs, weak and trembling, carried her away from that door, back to the sterile silence of her own suite. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep, too absolute for tears. It was a poison seeping into her bloodstream, freezing every emotion until only one remained, a terrifying, cold clarity. Clara locked the door to her suite, the click of the latch sounding like a vault being sealed. She sank onto the floor, her back against the cold, unfeeling wood. The magnificent wedding dress, a cloud of silk and lace, hung in the corner of the room, a ghostly specter of a future that had just been murdered. For a moment, her mind went blank. It was a white, silent space, a merciful void where the monstrous reality couldn't penetrate. But the void couldn't hold. The voices echoed again, a relentless replay of her life's deepest desecration. So beautifully naive, it's what makes her manageable. I made you, my boy. Every memory she had of her father's stern pride, of Mark's charming affection, was now tainted, rewritten in an instant. The pats on the back, the knowing glances between the two men, the way they spoke of her future as if it were a business plan, it all clicked into place with horrifying precision. She wasn't a cherished daughter or a beloved partner. She was a chess piece, a beautiful, quiet pawn moved across the board by two kings who shared the same crown of arrogance and deceit. The nausea rose in her throat, hot and acidic. She crawled to the bathroom, her body convulsing, but nothing came out. It was as if the poison had become part of her, a new, dark blood pumping through her veins. She stared at her reflection in the vast, gold-framed mirror. The face looking back was pale, the eyes wide with a silent scream. But beneath the shock, something else was beginning to stir. A flicker of fire in the frozen depths. They thought she was weak. They thought she was a doll, to be dressed up and displayed. They had underestimated her. They had counted on her silence, on her obedience, on her inability to conceive of a world beyond the one they had built for her. Her entire life, she had been praised for being quiet, for being agreeable. Her strength had never been tested because it had never been needed. Now, in the rubble of her heart, she felt it for the first time, not a gentle warmth, but a core of diamond-hard steel. The hours of that long night ticked by, each second a slow drop of poison. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Clara sat on the floor, wrapped in a thin robe, the wedding dress still looming in the darkness like a silent accuser. Her phone buzzed intermittently with cheerful, oblivious texts from bridesmaids and family. "Can't wait for tomorrow," one read. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride." Each message was a fresh stab of irony. She didn't respond. She was no longer a part of that world. She was in a different place now, a cold, clear-eyed reality where pretty lies had been stripped away to reveal an ugly truth. Her mind, now sharp with a purpose she had never known, began to work. It sifted through 26 years of memories, reevaluating, recataloguing. She remembered her father dismissing her career aspirations to be an art curator as a cute hobby. He had steered her towards a role at his foundation, a position with a fancy title but no real power, a place where he could keep her close, keep her managed. She remembered how Mark had proposed, not on one knee in a moment of intimate passion, but at a grand gala for her father's company, a public spectacle where her acceptance was part of the performance. She remembered the subtle ways they would finish each other's sentences, the private jokes that excluded her, the shared ambition in their eyes that she had mistaken for mutual respect. It wasn't respect. It was a partnership, and she was their joint venture. A wave of grief, pure and agonizing, finally washed over her. It wasn't for the loss of Mark, the man she thought she loved. It was for the loss of her father. The man who was supposed to be her protector, her first love, the one who set the standard for how she should be treated. He had not only failed to protect her, he had been the predator. He hadn't just allowed her to be hurt, he was the source of the wound. The grief burned through her, and in its wake, it left something hard and unyielding. Resolve. What were her options? She could call it all off quietly. Send a message. Disappear. Let the scandal simmer and fade. That is what the old Clara would have done. The manageable Clara. But that Clara was gone, burned away in the fire of that hallway conversation. No, a quiet cancellation was a form of complicity. It would allow them to control the narrative, to paint her as unstable, to preserve their own reputations. Their crime was loud. Their betrayal was absolute. Their punishment, she decided, would be public. It would be a spectacle of their own making. They had built the stage, sent out the invitations, and chosen the cast. She would simply write a new final act. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray, Clara finally stood up. Her legs were stiff, but her spine was straight. She walked over to the wedding dress, its pristine white a mockery of her reality. She ran her hand over the delicate lace. She would wear this dress. She would walk down that aisle. She would stand at that altar. But she would not be a sacrifice. She would be the reckoning. The morning of the wedding was a masterpiece of orchestrated chaos, a symphony of hairspray, champagne, and feigned calm. Clara's mother, Eleanor, floated into the suite, her face a mask of joyful anxiety. "Clara, darling, you're already awake. Look at you, so serene." Not a hint of nerves, she chirped, completely oblivious to the arctic stillness in her daughter's eyes. Clara allowed herself to be maneuvered, to be seated in front of a mirror while a team of stylists buzzed around her. Each touch felt like a violation, each cheerful comment a hammer blow to her fractured soul. They painted her face, curled her hair, transforming her into the perfect porcelain doll her father and Mark expected. She was a silent statue amidst the flurry, her expression unreadable. Her bridesmaids chattered excitedly, speculating about the honeymoon, the future, the beautiful life that lay ahead. Clara heard it all as if from a great distance, the words losing their meaning, becoming just noise. Inside, she was a fortress of silence, guarding the terrible knowledge that was her only true possession. "Just look at you," her mother whispered, her eyes welling with tears as the final pin was placed in her hair. "Absolutely radiant. Your father will be so proud. He'll probably weep when he sees you." The word father landed like a physical blow. Clara's jaw tightened, a barely perceptible tremor. She met her mother's gaze in the mirror, and, for a fleeting second, she wanted to tell her. She wanted to shatter Eleanor's happy, carefully constructed world. But she couldn't. Her mother was a victim in her own right, a woman who had lived her life as a good asset. The truth would destroy her in a way Clara couldn't bear to witness. This was her battle to fight. Alone. As they began to lace her into the gown, the weight of the silk and beads felt like armor. Each button fastened was another moment of resolve clicking into place. When she was finally dressed, she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. A beautiful, tragic queen preparing for war, not a wedding. "I need a moment," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Alone." Before we leave, her mother and the bridesmaids exchanged knowing glances, attributing it to last-minute jitters. They filed out of the room, leaving Clara in the suffocating silence. She walked to the window, looking down at the city streets bustling with life, a world of people unaware of the drama unfolding in this gilded cage. She needed one more thing. A confirmation of her own strength. "Can you please have the car take me to the church ahead of everyone?" she called out to her mother in the next room. I just want to pray for a moment in the sanctuary. By myself." Eleanor's voice came back, laced with sentimentality. "Of course, my love. How beautifully devout. Take all the time you need." The car ride was a blur. The city passed by in streaks of color. Clara felt nothing. She was hollowed out, a vessel for the justice she was about to deliver. The grand cathedral loomed before her, its stone spires reaching for a sky that offered no comfort. She stepped out of the car, the long train of her dress sweeping behind her, and walked towards the heavy oak doors, not as a bride seeking a blessing, but as an executioner approaching the gallows she had built for two. The cavernous interior of the cathedral was cool and hushed, smelling of old stone, wax, and incense. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the stone floor. It was a place of supposed peace, of sanctuary. For Clara, it was the battlefield. She saw a lone figure near the altar, arranging a liturgical book. It was Father Michael, the priest who had counseled her and Mark, a man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. He turned, surprised to see her. "Clara, my dear child, you're early. Is everything all right?" He approached her, his smile warm, but it faltered as he got closer. He saw past the flawless makeup and the perfect hair. He saw the profound, abyssal darkness in her eyes. This was not the look of a nervous bride. This was the look of a soul in torment. He was the catalyst she didn't know she was looking for, the perceptive authority figure who saw not the dress, but the woman drowning inside it. "I needed a moment to think," Clara said, her voice a low whisper that seemed to echo in the vast emptiness. "Father," she began, choosing her words with immense care, "I need to ask you a question. Not as a priest, but as a man who understands the human heart." Father Michael's expression softened with concern. He led her to the front pew, and they sat, the magnificent, empty church their witness. "Ask anything, my child." Clara stared straight ahead at the golden crucifix on the altar. "Can a marriage be blessed by God if it is built upon a foundation of absolute betrayal? Can vows be sacred if they are spoken by lips that tell unspeakable lies?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Father Michael didn't flinch. He didn't offer platitudes or easy scripture. He recognized the gravity of her words, the depth of the pain they hinted at. He saw a woman at a precipice, not asking for permission, but for validation of a choice she had already made. "God's house is, above all, a house of truth," he said, his voice calm and steady, a rock in her turbulent sea. "A vow is a sacred promise, Clara. Not just to a partner, but to God and to yourself. A promise to live in honesty, love, and respect. If that promise is broken before it is even made, the ritual is an empty one. It is a performance, not a sacrament." He looked at her, his gaze piercing. "Sometimes, the most difficult truths are the ones that set us free. And sometimes, the bravest sermon is not the one preached from the pulpit, but the one lived out in a moment of impossible courage." His words were the final piece of her armor clicking into place. He hadn't asked for details. He didn't need them. He saw the truth of her pain and honored it. He gave her not absolution, but empowerment. He validated her path, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of profound faith in the truth, and faith in herself. "Thank you, Father," she whispered, the words filled with a gratitude so immense it was almost painful. She stood up, her posture straighter than before. The tormented bride was gone. In her place stood a woman of conviction. Father Michael watched her, a deep sadness and a profound respect in his eyes. He knew that the service he was about to officiate would not be the one anyone was expecting. And he knew his role was not to prevent it, but to bear witness to it. The truth, he thought, was about to have its day in church. The cathedral began to fill, a low hum of chatter and anticipation rising to the vaulted ceilings. Guests in their finest attire mingled, their faces bright with celebration. At the front, standing beside a nervous but beaming Mark, was Richard Hawthorne. He was in his element, a king surveying his court. He clapped Mark on the shoulder, a proprietary gesture of ownership and pride. They were the architects of this day, the masters of this universe, their smug confidence a shield against a reality they couldn't fathom. The dramatic irony was a thick, suffocating blanket. The audience saw two powerful men at the pinnacle of their success. The universe and Clara saw two criminals moments away from their sentencing. Richard caught his wife Eleanor's eye in the front pew and gave her a subtle, satisfied nod. Everything was going according to his grand design. Mark adjusted his tie, his gaze fixed on the towering doors at the back of the church, waiting for his prize to appear. He felt a flicker of annoyance that Clara had been so quiet and distant that morning, but he brushed it off as typical female nerves. She would be fine once the ring was on her finger. Once she was officially his. The organ, which had been playing a soft prelude, swelled into the majestic, triumphant notes of the bridal march. A hush fell over the congregation. Every head turned towards the back. The great oak doors swung open, revealing Clara, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. A collective gasp of admiration rippled through the pews. She was a vision, an ethereal figure in white, the very picture of bridal perfection. But as she began her slow, deliberate walk down the aisle, a few perceptive guests in the front rows might have noticed something unsettling. Her face, though beautiful, was a mask of ice. Her eyes, fixed forward, held no joy, no nervous excitement. They held a terrifying, laser-like focus. She wasn't walking towards her future. She was marching toward a final, unavoidable confrontation. Her steps were not the light, floating steps of a happy bride. They were measured, heavy, each one a drumbeat of impending doom. Richard's chest swelled with pride, a tear glinting in his eye. This was his creation, his perfect daughter, completing the perfect picture. Mark's smile widened, a conqueror's smile, as his beautiful, manageable asset drew closer. He reached out his hand to take hers as she arrived at the altar. Her fingers were ice cold. She didn't squeeze his hand back. She simply let her fingers rest in his, a dead weight. She avoided his gaze, her eyes instead moving from Mark to her father and then to Father Michael, who gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod of support. The ceremony began, Father Michael's voice echoing through the silent church. He spoke of love, of union, of faith. To Clara, the words were a foreign language from a distant country she could no longer visit. She stood motionless, a silent, beautiful statue of judgment, waiting for her moment. Father Michael reached the pivotal moment in the ceremony. His voice, calm and resonant, filled the sacred space. We are gathered here today in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. This is a sacred covenant, an act of faith and a promise of lifelong fidelity. Therefore, if anyone here knows any just cause why Clara Hawthorne and Mark Ashton should not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. A traditional, pregnant pause followed. The air was thick with unspoken sentiment. This was the moment for a forgotten lover to object, a dramatic trope from movies. The guests held their breath for a fraction of a second, then collectively relaxed, ready for the ceremony to proceed. But the silence was broken. Not by a voice from the pews, but by a voice from the altar. I do. The words were quiet, yet they sliced through the cathedral like a shard of glass. They came from Clara. Every head snapped towards her. A confused murmur rippled through the congregation. Mark looked at her, his smile faltering, replaced by confusion and a hint of irritation. "Clara, honey, that's not your line yet," he whispered, trying to laugh it off. But there was no laughter in her eyes. She gently pulled her hand from his, the small movement an act of profound finality. She took one step forward, turning slightly to face not just Mark, but the entire congregation, her family, and her father. "There is a reason," she said, her voice stronger now, clear and unwavering, ringing with an authority no one had ever heard from her before. "There is a just cause." The murmuring stopped. A shocked, absolute silence descended upon the church. You could hear a pin drop on the cold stone floor. Richard Hawthorne, in the front row, leaned forward, his face a thunderous mask of disbelief and fury. What was she doing? What was this foolish game? Clara's eyes first locked onto Mark's. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. "Mark Ashton," she began, her voice devoid of heat or hysteria, making the words all the more devastating. "You stand here before God and all these people, prepared to vow your fidelity to me. A vow you have already broken. A sacred promise you shattered before it was ever spoken." Gasps echoed around the room. Mark's face went white. "Clara, stop it. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his composure cracking. "I am talking about last night," Clara continued, her voice relentless. "I am talking about the woman you were with. The woman you chose to share your last night of freedom with." She let that hang in the air for a moment, letting the implication sink into the minds of the horrified guests. Then, she delivered the killing blow, her gaze shifting from Mark's crumbling face to the front pew, where her father sat, frozen. "I am talking about the person you betrayed me with. The person you made a sordid pact with. Weren't you so sure I would never find out? Weren't you so certain of my beautiful naivety?" Clara's gaze, like a spotlight in a darkened theater, swung from the pale, trembling figure of Mark to the man in the front row. Her father. Richard Hawthorne sat as if turned to stone, his face a mottled canvas of purple rage and stark white shock. His fists were clenched, his knuckles white. He looked like a king whose throne was collapsing into dust beneath him. "And you," Clara's voice rang out, each word a perfectly aimed arrow. "Father," the word dripped with a sorrow so profound it was almost venomous. "You were supposed to be my protector. The man who taught me about integrity, about honor. You stood there, ready to give me away, knowing you had already taken everything. You handed your protégé the keys to your company, and you handed him your daughter as part of the deal. A manageable asset, Wasn't that the term you used? A collective, horrified gasp swept through the cathedral. It was one thing to accuse a fiancé of infidelity. It was another, monstrous thing to implicate her own father in such a grotesque conspiracy. Eleanor, beside Richard, looked from her husband's terrified, guilty face to her daughter's steely, heartbroken one, and a terrible understanding began to dawn on her, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. Clara was not done. She was excavating the rot, exposing it to the light for all to see. This wedding, she declared, her arms sweeping to encompass the opulent flowers, the stunned guests, the entire charade, was never about love. It was a transaction. A merger. And I was the final clause in the contract. She pointed a trembling but steady finger at Mark, gets the company. And you, her eyes bored into her father, get to keep your legacy secure, your creation under your thumb, ensuring the empire you built continues in your own image. You didn't raise a daughter. You groomed a commodity. Mark, utterly broken, could only shake his head, muttering no, 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 his reputation and future dissolving in real time. Richard, however, was a cornered animal. A low growl rumbled in his chest. He made to stand, to shout, to deny, to use the force of his personality to crush this rebellion. But he was silenced. Not by a hand, but by the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, all staring at him, seeing him for the first time not as a titan of industry, but as a moral monster. The silence in the church was no longer just shocked. It was heavy, judgmental, and absolute. It was the sound of a powerful man's world being utterly and irrevocably destroyed by the quiet daughter he had so tragically underestimated. There were no more whispers. There was only the ringing truth of Clara's words, hanging in the sacred air like a final, damning verdict. The cathedral remained frozen in a tableau of shock. In that deafening silence, Clara performed the final act of her liberation. She raised her hands to her head and with a slow, deliberate motion, she unpinned her veil. The gossamer fabric, a symbol of purity and tradition, floated from her hair and drifted to the cold stone floor at her feet. It was a surrender and a declaration of war all in one. She was surrendering the life that had been chosen for her and declaring war on the lies that had sustained it. She turned her back on the altar, on the shell-shocked priest, on the broken man she was supposed to marry, and on the father who had orchestrated her ruin. She faced the congregation, her face now bare, her expression not triumphant, but serene, filled with the sad, clean peace of a hard-won truth. "I apologize to you all," she said, her voice resonating with a newfound power. "You came here today to witness a wedding. But a wedding is a celebration of love, trust, and honesty. And there is none of that here. What you have witnessed instead is a funeral. The death of a lie." Her eyes swept over the crowd, landing for a moment on her weeping mother. She gave a small, sad nod, a promise of a conversation to come, a shared grief to be navigated later. Then she stood tall, her spine a rod of steel inside the silk dress. "Let this be a lesson," she said, her voice a clarion call. "That respect is not a commodity to be traded. That a woman's heart is not an asset to be managed. And that the truth, no matter how ugly, is always more beautiful than the most dazzling lie." With that, she turned and began to walk. Not run. She walked down the long aisle with the same slow, deliberate pace she had used on her way in. But this time, she was not walking towards a cage. She was walking towards freedom. Her head was held high, her eyes fixed on the open doors at the end of the church, a portal to a new, unknown, but honest life. The guests parted for her as if she were royalty, their faces a mixture of awe, pity, and profound respect. She passed the pew where Richard still sat, utterly defeated, his face buried in his hands. She did not look at him. He was no longer a part of her world. As she reached the doors and stepped out into the sunlight, a new life beginning with that single step, Father Michael finally spoke into the stillness, his voice filled with a quiet authority. "The ceremony is concluded," he announced to the stunned room. "Go in peace," but it was Clara who had truly found it. What would you have done? Would you have chosen the quiet, painful peace of a private heartbreak or the loud, earth-shattering liberation of a public truth? Clara's story is a testament to the fact that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest betrayals. It's a reminder that true power isn't about controlling others. It's about having the courage to reclaim control of your own story, even if it means tearing down the world you knew. Sometimes, the most sacred vow we can ever make is not to another person, but to our own self-worth, to our own truth. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength. Comment below if you believe she did the right thing, and remind someone in your life that their voice, no matter how quiet it may seem, has the power to silence an entire church and set them free.